Welcome everyone. My name is Patty Tsai and I am the Director of Alumni Relations at Columbia University School of Professional Studies. Thank you for taking the time to be with us for Land a Nonprofit Board Seat, Expert Tips to Get Recruited. We have an amazing panel who will be sharing their expertise. But first, let me introduce you to our moderator, Sandra Allen, who brings both deep expertise and passion to this important topic of nonprofit board service, and was instrumental in creating tonight's program. Sandra is the founder and CEO of Almora Advisors, a consultancy dedicated to strengthening the social sector through innovation and impact. With over 30 years of experience in board development, strategic planning, and fundraising, she is a trusted advisor to nonprofit leaders nationwide. Sandra currently serves on the Alumni Trustee Nominating Committee for Columbia University and holds several volunteer leadership roles at nonprofit organizations in the area. Sandra has a Master's of Science degree in Nonprofit Management from Columbia University School of Professional Studies. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Sandra.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you today. And before we start, I want to tell you a little bit of a quick story about my first experience on the board. I had done the right things, in an academic setting, which I was fundraising. I was doing a lot of behind-the-scene work to get the attention of the board. So what happened? This very incredible, prestigious board asked me to serve. What did I do? I said, wow, me? Had a little bit of an imposter syndrome for a minute, but then I had the moment of say yes to the dress, and I said yes. And I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't really know to ask any questions. I was very lucky. I had a former board member, kind of knew what I was doing wrong here, and they said to me, let me take you out for lunch. I want to tell you about this board experience. I said, sure. So at lunch, they told me all the things that I should have done, I should have asked. Even the simple thing they said, the boardroom does not have enough seats for that board meeting. You need to get there earlier. You're not going to have a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. And right off the bat, you need to establish that your voice counts. I can't tell you how instrumental that mentorship was for me. It enabled me to have a really successful experience. From that experience, I wanted to serve on more boards. I wanted to get involved, and it made a huge difference. It even made a difference of what I wanted to do with my life, which is really to do consulting and do a lot of this work and my passion for governance. But now, the real professionals and the experts, we're going to turn it over to them and let them do their magic. I'm going to first have them tell us a little bit about themselves. And I'm going to start off with Nathaniel Fields, and he's the Chief Executive Officer of the Urban Resource Institute. In addition to telling us a little bit about your background, we have a little twist. I would like you to tell us a skill or talent that you bring to your board service.
Cool. So I am so excited to be here tonight. When we talked about doing this, I thought it was an incredible opportunity. I know you're going to be shocked when I say this, and even if you're not, pretend that you are. But I'm entering my 40th year in the nonprofit sector. It should be shocking. And I still feel like it's a privilege to do this work. Currently, I'm at the Urban Resource Institute, and we're organized to end domestic and gender-based violence as well as homelessness. We're on the larger side of the nonprofit, in terms of the space. We have about 1,000 employees dedicated to this issue. Some of my colleagues are here tonight. I would say that when I think about the work, I'm going to get to the sort of secret sauce question. I just want to say a little more about me. I grew up in East New York, Brooklyn, a few decades ago, and I recall some of the chaos that we experienced during that time in terms of what was happening in the city, the populations, and some of the challenges. And even with those challenges, I remember the people on the block and the block association as they formed. At the time, we had a block association president that I thought was a pain because he kept meetings going, he kept order going, and he kept us very organized and safe. And from that, I took that the power of the person and the power of people when they organize and the power of people when they volunteer. So I got hooked right away in terms of wanting to do service, wanting to do things in the community. While I run a nonprofit, I also have served on many boards. I'm currently on a board of an entity called Human Services Council. And it's sort of a membership organization where many nonprofits are members. And it's a great opportunity because we meet some amazing leaders across New York City and some from mid-state. And I would say what I offer, the sort of secret sauce there, is I think I create stability and challenge. When we started, I'm on my 8th year there, so it's time to probably get turned out. We took a bold step to want to be more inclusive as a board. And we partnered with institutions, executive search firms, and boards to talk about how do we plan to have board members be more representative of the community. And so I say that when I look at Human Services Council, we've sort of achieved that. So I think that ability to ask in the hard questions and get to actual results. So I would say that's my secret sauce.
Love that.
Yeah.
Barbara Paxton is the director of Board Strong.
Thank you. So yes, Board Strong is an organization where we believe passionately in the power of boards. We believe that effective boards, well-run boards, can make organizations stronger and therefore make their programs and the communities that they serve, the programs that they provide to their communities stronger as well. So our work is entirely focused on recruiting, consulting, helping boards do better. I'm currently on the board of the Comprehensive Community Health Practice, which is a health practice in East Harlem, where I live. I would say what I would bring to the board is, Human Service Council is a huge organization. I would say I'm better at sort of mid-size boards because I can really roll up my sleeves and help them figure out how to make it work, how to make their committees work, how to make their nominating process work, how to explain to other people how they can be more effective as board members.
Thank you. Rachel is the program director from the New York Community Trust.
Yes, so you have to excuse my voice, I'm getting over a cold. So yes, I'm a program director at the New York Community Trust, which is New York City's community foundation. And that means rather than relying on a single donor, we rely on donations from thousands of New Yorkers, and those range from the names you're gonna recognize, like the Rockefellers and JP Morgan and whomever, and taxi cab drivers and public school teachers. We give about $200 million out by year in grants. About $50 million of that is focused on New York City. I oversee grant making in a couple areas, one of which is technical assistance, and that is focused on building the resiliency of the nonprofit sector here in New York City and understanding the gaps of what skill sets are needed for the sector. I think I have a background in evaluations, so the critical analysis is really helpful, but I think what boards are attracted by my service is, and I kind of speak the secret language of foundations, that I may not have the connections and may not be able to get you a grant from a colleague, but at least I can tell you what we're looking for a proposal, which is really helpful because it is a little bit of like another language, so I'm somewhat bilingual in that. And yeah, having that connection to the philanthropic sector is, I think, really important to volunteers.
Thank you so much. As you can see, we have an incredible array of different skill sets, and the questions are going to address that, so you get a whole picture from every angle. And I want to really start by saying strong boards just don't happen. And I'm going to turn to Nathaniel. You've helped shape some really effective boards. What do you look for in board members when building a team that can truly govern and guide an organization?
So I would say it's important to understand the life cycle that the organization is in. If it's a well-established organization, and we have divisions and departments and chiefs, then we're probably going to look for board members who are senior in their role in their respective companies or company that could add an ability to, of course, connect to our mission, be consistent with our values, connect us to resources based on our strategic plan and goals. When I arrived at URI about 13 years ago, we were actually more in a turnaround situation. We had separated from our parent entity and we were in crises. And so at that point, our board who hired me was more of a community-based board. And because we were really small, we were about 170 employees, we needed board members that had very specific skills to complement the skills of our staff members or the positions we just didn't have. An example of that would be, we really needed a board member that had deep knowledge of corporate law in the nonprofit sector. So one of our board members worked for a large law firm, and he used his law firm and skills to support the organization. So in that sort of early turnaround life cycle, we were looking for board members who has knowledge and skills to support the work of the organization. Today, 13 years later, because we've, in sort of our journey, we have hired staff members who are in those departments and divisions that have that experience. And so now we're looking at individuals who are deeply connected to, you can hear this a lot, the mission, that sort of their values are consistent with sort of our values as an organization, that they're really assessing that they have time to be engaged. And we want to be, as sort of recruiting board members, really be very clear of what we're looking for, the obligation in terms of time and commitment, be really clear about how many meetings and what success looks like. And so you see us looking at, we're about 16, we're moving to about 21 board members to adequately fill our committees, do the work in terms of some of the work to support our staff members. And because we're about 98% government funded, we're also looking for board members who have resources in some of those areas. Our work is a lot around prevention and housing. And so a lot of the work we're doing is, you can see some legal requirements in real estate. So we're looking for board members in this life cycle that have those kind of abilities. But very much, just to summarize again, based on the life cycle we've been in, we've been very focused on what type of board members we need.
Thank you. Rachel, once someone's on board, we talked a lot about this. What are some of the legal and ethical responsibilities that aren't so obvious? And can you walk us through what the fiduciary duties look like?
Yeah. The key is kind of understanding the financial background of the organization. I think that is one of the key, and having a real ability to read a 990, read audited financial statements, read budgets, because I think I'm like Nathaniel, I'm glad your experience was a good one, but in my time at the trust, I've seen a lot of situations in which organizations were blindsided and had to shut down. And these were organizations that were 100 years old in some cases. And a lot of it had to do with the board not being aware of what is going on financially. So having the capacity to review those financial statements and the autonomy to push back on the executive director, because it is a partnership between the executive leadership team and the board. So those responsibilities around, yes, you having to report those data to the federal government on the 990, but also fully understanding what those mean. I know Barbara has a lot more experience around fiduciary responsibilities, so you might want to fill in some pieces there.
Sorry, I would say Rachel is right. Even if you are not a financial genius and you do not have a financial background on the board, you need to know where the money is coming from and how it's being spent. So you could have investment bankers and CPAs and CFOs everybody has to bring, I think,
Basic
their
understanding.
basic understanding, because to Daniel's point, we're looking for certain skills and experiences, but we're also recognizing that a board is a group of people and that groups, diverse groups of people make better decisions than homogeneous groups of people. So we want people who, have artistic skills or financial, whatever, but we want people to bring in their outside experiences to question what they don't think is right, to keep an eye out for groupthink, for example. And so that's the main thing that I would say. I would say the fiduciary responsibility in the organization is pretty basic. You want the money that's being given to the organization to go towards the mission that it was meant just for. And that's the board's, I think, highest obligation.
I'd probably add governance, right? Fiduciary responsibilities and governance. And we have a responsibility as an organization, working with our chair and executive committee to set a board member up for success. So what is that onboarding, from recruiting and onboarding? We want to sort of have or engage in our standing documents, our articles of incorporation, our bylaws, the committee charter. So what the nonprofit has been formed to do, and what are those sort of rules in terms of the bylaws. And then of course, the committee structure, the charters, in terms of what the committees stand for and what you're able to do in that. So that's our obligation in setting up board members for success. And then of course, I think it's been my experience, and you also weigh, board members also want to connect with each other, a group of strangers coming together, right? So how do you build this sort of harmony, a sense of purpose? And so you want to be intentional on forming, many things you've probably been to, how do you sort of form relationships? And we also want to be able to create that as it relates to the board. Sometimes board members show up for each other in that relationship. So we want to be very intentional about that.
I also want to ask you, Barbara, we talked a little bit about, how someone could get involved, like the future leaders, without, with coming from a non-traditional background. How does a board member look at getting involved?
So first off, many of you want to be on boards. I would say that you all can be, right? There is a stereotypical idea among people who could be on boards of what a nonprofit board member looks like. Most boards do not have that stereotypical idea, and they desperately want you on their boards. So that's the first thing. I think that, there are ways. There's volunteering. There's following organizations on Facebook. I have a board meshing platform that's free for you to sign up for, called boardstrong.org. So I think it's about the passion for the organization. There's any number of ways you can sort of check into it. Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about governance no-nos?
Not having, big one, conflicts of interest. Conflicts of interest are the thing that I see as the biggest issue. Family members on a board, family members of the executive director and board members, that's not necessarily absolutely a no-no, but there needs to be conflicts of interest policies that are reviewed regularly, that are on the books, that are all agreed to and abided by. If that's not happening, that's a huge red flag. As soon as I see a board of less than 5 people, for one, because then there's some voting power issues, and then if I see family members on a board and see paid people on the board, I always ask, what is this? If they can provide an explanation and provide, a very concrete, thorough conflict of interest policy, then I'll let it pass for now. But if not, I won't make a grant to that organization.
Yeah. You want a list? I would say there are 2 things. The first would be not having term limits, not bringing in new people to show up. If you have an organization where the board chair, and I just talked to one this morning, the board chair has been there for 25 years, then there's not a place for you as a board member in that organization. And I even question whether the organization is innovative or positive. I would say the other thing is different rules for different board members, different expectations. And that mostly happens when you have older board members and you want, they're not showing up anymore, but they've been on the board forever, or they're not coming, they're not doing what the other board members are. It's very disheartening to the younger board members. You don't want, and in any way, not only that, you don't want two classes of board members. Board members who show up, the board members who don't. Board members who've been there forever, the board members who are new. You want to make sure that you establish a level playing field.
I want to follow up on that because I think typically people think it's like a small organization that isn't following all these rules. But I wanted to demystify this because I've seen it where it's like, organizations that you expect, that they would have incredible governance and they don't. And how do you fix that problem?
Don't give them grants. So I'm not gonna name any names, but there was a very large national organization that had some real issues in terms of conflicts of interest. And I articulated that to the executive director, and he said, can you put that on paper for me? I said, sure, I wrote it in an email. And I said in the email, if we'll make a grant this year, if that doesn't change, we will not be able to continue funding the organization. Mind you, these are, I think the average grant size that we gave this organization was between 100 and 150, and they were a large national organization, so it really wasn't breaking their budget. However, he used that documentation to say, here, look, we can't start up in New York City if we don't have this foundation a partner with us. And for that reason, they were able to move things along. So for us, it really is holding back funding. And that has happened quite a few times.
And we don't want to scare you, but we want you to come going into board service thinking about all these things, because then you are asking the questions, and I think with Daniel, you talked about that. And how do you encourage your board members to, challenge you and, challenge your organization?
Yeah, I've asked them to stop doing that. More sir, it's the nonprofit sector is so rewarding, but so challenging. Nonprofits average size around I know we're in New York, so we're talking like big numbers and big nonprofits, but across the states, it's about $2 million nonprofits. And some of the smaller ones, it's been my experience that most nonprofits want to do good work. And some of it is around the training and the resources, and then of course having board members be able to recruit and retain board members to sort of augment some of the skills that they don't have in staff, particularly when they're smaller, to be able to sort of be able to serve the organization. So I would say that in the smaller organizations, it's really good to be clear on what your role is and what you would really be able to add to that particular organization, and ensure that the board members are practicing in terms of governance and their fiduciary responsibility, like being really clear. That's very important, because it's one of those things around reputation. You could do it appropriately 90% of the time, but that one issue that lands you in your local paper sort of sticks, and it becomes very difficult to attract private money. It's a need for board members across the country in New York to be able to support, your volunteers are really connecting to your time, your skills to support an entity that's really trying to do good in the community. And there's some bad actors. I think in some of this work today, we're talking about how not to sort of do that, how to pick the right organizations, what can you do? But I would say to you, glass half full, the overwhelming majority of nonprofits generally want to do the right thing. So no.
No, I think even overwhelmingly, board members want to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're misguided and don't quite know what they're doing, but ultimately I think everyone who's willing to commit their time to public service is doing it for the right reasons. Generally, like usual.
And I like that you brought that up. Training, what kinds of things can, we tell the audience to get involved in so that they can really be a good board member.
Board Strong offers
We offer all sorts of training. For those of you who want to join a board, get my card. Every other month, I do a training on how to join a nonprofit board. It goes into your fiduciary responsibilities and then encourages you to sign up for my platform, which is free. Because it is our mission to put good people on good boards. I think the number of resources that are available for nonprofit boards are, extensive and free on Google. Just Google, because there's all sorts of consultants who are giving you tidbits of information in order to entice you to, buy their services. That's probably in some ways, candidly. It really takes, I think, you need to be part of. The board needs to look at itself and realize that dysfunction is not the best thing for the organization. And sometimes people like doing things the way they've always done them, and that is hard to challenge if you don't have a core group of people.
dysfunction and stagnancy.
Stagnancy,
It doesn't necessarily need to be dysfunction,
Yeah.
if it's stagnant.
Exactly. Good point.
So what's the advice for someone? I mean, sometimes people are a little intimidated by joining the board. And, the training is great, but some other things that you could say to start dipping your toe in and not feeling that kind of, I can't go there or I can't be part of this. They may not want me. What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a dance like any new relationship. Sometimes before sort of diving in, you may want to go to their event. You may know somebody on the board. Some new organizations have friends of so-and-so, so friends of your eye. You're not a board member that's carrying the sort of governance and fiduciary responsibilities, but you may attend and support the organization. So gradual sort of getting to know the organization, and as you start to sort of engage, to feel you may then have an opinion of I can sort of want to do more, and you learn the organization before jumping in. Because there's, as board members, there's some liability there, right? And so even though you are volunteers and have good intentions, if something goes horribly wrong, board members are liable as well. So nonprofits would generally have insurance and coverage to protect board members, but there's that liability as a board member. So I would also, this is my first experience, I would say dance with the organization for a while, look at how they appear in social media, their website. There are a lot of good resources like Board Source that sort of lays it out there for you in terms of what's good governance. And then talk to board members. I would say one of the things that boards don't usually show you when you're joining a board, ask to see if you can read their minutes. They may not say yes.
Minutes.
It generally can tell you what's been going on in the organization. And if they are open and if it's transparent, that will give you an indication for what's really going on in an organization.
And all their finances are available through, audited finances are available, if not on their website, then through other resources. So I would say look at that as well, just so you can cross-check every time.
I would also say, you want to join a board where you connect with what they do, where you're passionate about their mission. So the extent to which you can find a volunteer thing, or just say, I'd love to come and see one of your programs, et cetera, and really understand their philosophy about how they run their programs, will give you an idea of what they're about, what their boards are about. There's all sorts of, different, let me give you an example. There are sports organizations I live in Harlem. Some of them are very focused on getting their students into, to be student athletes, to be part of NCAA programs. Others of them are very focused on their participants just enjoying the sport and hoping to get into college and using it as a wish discipline. So you want to think about that. Like if you think either one of those things, it's very different organizations, and it'll help you choose rather than just saying, I just want to be on a basketball team.
So when you're either reviewing applications or your own board service, what says, wow, this is going to make a great board member? What are the skill sets that you look for, and what should people be trying to develop as skills?
I would say, back to my the question that I just gave, I mean, you all are talented, skilled graduates of Columbia University, right? You don't have to hone much more than that. You do want to understand enough about the organization so that you can demonstrate a passion for what they do and a dedication to what they do. And they're gonna convince them that you're gonna be motivated to show up to board meetings, to join a committee, to get to know the finances, all of those things. I mean, I don't think trying to develop different skill sets will necessarily, if they're looking for a human resource person and you're not that, but though I frankly tell everybody never turn down a good board member, even if they don't fit your exact profile at the moment. But really a good board member is all about showing up, doing the work, being a leader for the organization. An ambassador as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to understand the mission of the organization. I mean, I've served sometimes on boards where I think people are just kind of doing it because their friend asked them to do it. And I'm shocked because I think it's so important that you really know the work that's being done and that you're committed to that work, because I think it makes you much stronger.
As a funder, I am most impressed in times that I have conversations with prospective grantees, and it's the executive director and a board member, and they're interchangeable. Like, the board member knows enough about the organization that I would be, I'm shocked to find out that they're not a staff member. And those are the kind of true advocates and allies of the organization, and really are passionate about the organization, that they are willing to commit their time to speaking with funder.
What are you seeing right now in the boardrooms today compared to the boardrooms of the past? How are they evolving, and what are some of the changes that you're seeing?
I mean, the diversity in terms of, like, not necessarily looking for the traditional skill sets. It used to really be a give-get. So if you didn't have the money that you could donate to an organization, you wasn't necessarily as much appreciation of that individual. In the past, it has always been smaller organizations that have been more likely needed working board members. I don't think that's always the case anymore. And now there's more understanding of people with lived experience, people with disabilities, people of color, and making sure that there's diversity on the board, both in terms of ethnic and racial diversity, but also class diversity and ability. And that I've seen a real change in that. I'd say within 5 years, there's definitely been an evolution in terms of more focus on bringing in a diverse group of board members.
And Barbara, we talked about, you said a lot of what you're discussing is trying to move away from the give-get.
Oh, totally.
So for those of you who don't know, there are some organizations which have a minimum amount of money that they expect a board member to either give or contribute. And for a long time, there was an organization that I won't name that was telling everybody that they had to do that, that it was important for them to recruit board members that had means, which was ridiculous. But anyway, because it's a barrier to the skill sets that you need, to subject matter experts. If you're, an organization that does work, like yours, and you don't have a social worker on it, if you run after-school programs and you don't have an educator on your board, it's a real detriment. And I think that was changing before, but we've written the murder of George Floyd, but afterwards, one of the things that did to sort of privileged society was make them look at the systems that perpetuate economic inequality and how they perpetuate economic inequality and other forms of inequality, and really think about, if we are providing services to a community and none of the people from that community are actually a voice in the room, then we're just perpetuating the systems that keep these going. And so the give-get is really become more of well, first, everybody has to give a meaningful contribution of some sort. Rachel wants to see that. But not in terms of requiring a certain minimum. As you're looking for boards, there are some that still do. That change doesn't happen overnight. But there's really, unless you are, there are so few organizations where board contributions are a significant part of their budget that, you sort of sit back and say, why are we requiring people to give, X amount of money when our whole board only contributes 2% of our budget, right? There's just no reason for it. You demonstrate a commitment by showing up, by doing the work. And, now that being said, organizations need money. So when you join a board, you may not have a minimum or contribution, but you're going to have to get out there and be an ambassador for the organization and be part of their fundraising efforts, go to their galas, meet with their HO, those sort of things, right? Because they do need money, but we're not beating people up in terms of like trying to get them in terms of a minimum amount of money they ask for, and for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I would just, why? Why are we, as a nonprofit, looking to have a get? And it is evolving because we're doing a lot of mapping. Where are we in this life cycle? What kind of board member do we need? And if we give it at a level that you are able to give, then we can have some diversity in terms of how people give. And I think that's where we're going as an organization. We're in New York, and particularly in the sort of the work that we do, direct services, our workforce is 80% female identified, 60-70% people of color. You have nonprofits that get the lowest wages prescribed by government contracts, government, and then so for-profit entity. When we have to hire a lawyer, they may want to really do this work, but how do we compete? They have to eat in New York City. And so our contracts are so challenging that we have to diversify our revenue. And so you got to build infrastructure to diversify your revenue. When we apply for private grants, the reality is that sometimes your board members do know people that can support your grant, show up with you, talk about why this is so important, and connect you. If you don't have infrastructure and you're applying for grants, well, how do you write the grant? How do you evaluate the grant? So you need resources that government contracts will pay for. So I just want to give a little context. This is sometimes why we're looking to diversify. Small nonprofits are very, very challenged because they're organized to connect to that mission. Sometimes they've experienced the issue themselves and they have this big heart and they want to ensure that they're using that lived experience so other people don't have to sort of face it. And then so they learn the business of it. And it's sometimes challenging to attract the philanthropy. And so sometimes the board members can be a route to attracting philanthropy so you can be that stronger organization. So you don't wind up in a paper or you don't have so-and-so doing these things. So it's that sort of dance sometimes. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mean to say that if you have means, you shouldn't be thinking about giving money or connecting people to the organization. It's more sort of thinking about the skills and talents that people bring and making sure they're doing right. I mean, if Michael Bloomberg is on your board, you can have expectations.
Yeah. And diversity too, in terms of age, as I get more senior in the room, it's a different way of communicating what's important, what's relevant. And so you also want to look at, are all of our board members like north of 50? Am I missing something around the table? And sometimes you are. And so as you do the mapping, you really want to say, who are we? What's sort of that strategic plan? What are our values? And it's diverse, and age becomes another important factor.
And I think having some similarities between the board and your staff too, because if you have a predominantly young staff but an older board, the board may not understand some of the challenges that the staff are facing and can't speak to some of the concerns that they have. So.
And that's a struggle because I know from my own board service, many times I'm like, we need some younger board members. And it pains me to say that I have to say younger board members too. they're just not open. Many boards are just not open. Some are, but many boards are just not open to it. They don't understand what talents and what things a younger board member could bring. And I think it's really, I think we talked about it, Barbara, what a struggle that is. So, we want to get you out there and try.
The other thing that often happens, I see with boards, is that they may say, okay, we'll try with this board member that may not look like us, who may not be the same age as us. But if they are not then willing to allow that person to succeed in their role, they're setting them up for failure. So that's often a challenge as well, that they may be willing to, think about evolving, but then if it's not a full embrace of that, it's going to be a challenge for that new person, and they may, not feel supported in their role or what have you. And in those cases, I think whenever a board if you see a board who's going and having a conversation with an expert consultant and going through kind of a mapping and an evolution phase, I see that as really a green flag, in that they're willing to do the work of thinking about how we can change ourselves to be more responsive to the needs of our community, because that's the first step. It is a lot of work for them. And if they're willing to take that step towards the work, I think that actually shows that they're willing to move forward and think about changes.
There's a lot of tools that they can use because of just like mentorship
Right.
and buddy system and all those kinds of things to help bring everyone along. So one of the things that I'd love to ask you is, what have you seen maybe yourselves or other new board members make, the mistakes that they make right off the bat?
Well,
Don't ask questions. They don't ask questions. They think they just put their head down and just expect everything to kind of fall into place. That's a huge challenge because you walk in with assumptions.
Yeah, I was gonna say, new board members usually don't make the mistake. I agree. I think not asking questions, and that's also the fault of the board chair, right? You want to bring people out. I think, I wouldn't say it's a new board member mistake. I would say it's an organizational mistake. That sometimes organizations are not clear and transparent about what they want from board members. Right? It's nice to be able to be like choosy about we want this skill or that skill or whatever, but frequently for small organizations, they really need board members. And so they'll say things like, it's not that much time, it's not that much money. And so if they're not transparent, there can be surprises.
Okay, so I just want to take this moment as we're going to move into questions shortly, but would love to have you each kind of give your 2 cents and your experience to the audience on what they should do moving forward.
Well, first, my webinar. We'll break down those fiduciary responsibilities. No, I think just sit back and think, what am I passionate about? It doesn't have to be one thing. You can be passionate about his cause and, animals or whatever. But think about what am I passionate about? How do I want to contribute, right? Do I want to be on an international organization? Do I want to be, I'm on a board of an organization in my community. And so start to approach it that way and then follow that path.
I would say, speaking to a large group of mostly women, imposter syndrome is real. And it's very, very hard. It's very intimidating to try to battle that. But I think it's very much worth it. And as we were saying, that you do have a skill set, you do have something of value that you can add to the board, and really having conversations and just being open to those conversations with the nonprofits, that's the first step. And it really just make the move because they would like to have you.
only thing I would add is I do think get to know that nonprofit, do some research. You all coming out of a fine institution, so you know how to do that. The time you spend doing the research, that thing, understanding what they're wanting to do, their values. Look at some of the sort of their presence to ensure that publicly they're presenting in a way that is consistent with your values. Your own self-evaluation, do you have time at this point in your life to be able to go to the meetings, be prepared for meetings? We send a lot of information out. It's difficult if you don't have time or you have other obligations, you go to a meeting, you're not quite prepared because 4 to 5 meetings a year or some committee meetings, you really need members to be prepared to engage in the business of the organization. I do like this idea of time limits that sometimes we grapple with that too. It shouldn't be a forever proposition. And we have great board members and we're still balancing how to do that. Sometimes you never want to see them go. And of course, there are others you can't wait to go. With time limits, it's not a forever proposition. You can support the organization in different ways. And sometimes that helps to say, well, it's a 3-year commitment. And be able to then see where you are in your life and be able to meet that commitment.
And I love that you said be prepared for meetings, because as a board chair, so many times I'm directly involved with all the material that's in there. And then when I'm hearing all the board members asking the questions, I'm like, I know that's on page 5.
And for staff, because I'm a part of the board meetings for the trust, and when my board members don't read the materials, I know, and it's so disheartening because I spend hours working. So just be respectful of your materials, please.
Great. Thank you so much for all this information. I'm assuming you have a lot of questions, so please, I think might be a mic, right?
Jordan sent me.
Testing, okay. Hi, thank you all for being here. This was awesome to hear. My name is Rita LeBron, and I just graduated from the Sustainability Management Program. So a lot of great discussion of what we should do as great board members or to be great board members. How do you keep an executive director? What kind of mechanism is there preventing them from really a complacent board? Maybe one that doesn't ask questions. Obviously there's a recruitment aspect to it, there's a performance review aspect to it, but what is there to really ensure the entire board isn't just complacent in carrying out the wishes of the executive director? Can you tell I've been in this situation before? Thank you.
I think those checks and balances that you put in place, they need to be implemented, because sometimes you have them on paper, but it doesn't actually come to fruition. So I advocate it.
Yeah, it's the culture of the organization, right? So if it's a 100-year-old organization, really the board is responsible with some support from the CEO, the executive director, to support the recruitment process. However, if that board is, a 100-year-old organization and board members have been around for 20 to 30 years, you may not have that ability to do some of these best practices to be able to say, let's do some term limits. No, everyone's going to be here forever. And that becomes a challenge. So I do think it's, how does this board really function? How long have the members been around? Who's really running the show? Can give you some indication of whether or not this support is going to be innovative and not complacent. So it's good sometimes to say, well, if it's a 20-year-old, board chair, what's going on here? Why is this chair still around? And it doesn't mean because the chair's around they're not innovative, but it is a red flag. I would start to think about can we be innovative? Are you going to tolerate new members? Are you going to tolerate new ideas?
It's surprising sometimes just a couple of new board members can make change happen. And I think a board chair has a lot of responsibility in that space. And I have seen it though, with just over time with recruitment being really thoughtful, where an organization like that can change. It's not going to happen overnight. You can also look at coming from the consultant's perspective, bringing in consultants to kind of give them a view of what they're doing, because sometimes it's internally they don't know, they don't see it.
I would also say, like you said, sometimes it's the culture of the organization, especially in founder-driven organizations. They've recruited all their friends, they're the visionary, etc. Really think about, there's 103,000 nonprofits in the state of New York. 40-something of them are in New York City. So if you get stuck on a board where you're not valued, there's got to be another one out there where you can make a difference about something that you care about.
Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hi, I'm Gloria. I am a graduate of Strategic Communications a couple of years ago. And hearing some of you talk about the red flags, I fully experienced it because of my job. We work with a lot of nonprofits, and we have had folks who hire family members. We have had, we've had horror stories, and I'm working through that and with them as they come to us for money. It's heartbreaking knowing that at the end of the day, you are not serving the community in the way that you're supposed to. I work in city government, and now I'm interested in getting involved in board membership. So my question to you all is, these things that you point out, the red flags we're supposed to look for, how does somebody who's never been a board member go about finding those things out? Apart from reading, asking for board minutes, apart from reading financial documents, apart from reading a background about nonprofit on their website, how can we get a sense of the culture of the nonprofit? How can we understand how the board actually runs? How can we know how long these board members have been in service, et cetera, et cetera?
Make sure you meet a bunch of them. I mean, your nominating process should involve, at a minimum, meeting the executive director, going on a site visit of some sort, experiencing their programs, and then talking to 2 board members, I would say. They're trying to rush you on without being deliberative about getting to know you and you getting to know them. I think that's probably the biggest red flag, and that's the way that you'll find out about it. It's not foolproof, not 100%, but getting so excited about, I just want to be on the board of this organization, that you don't sort of take the time to get to know it, is a way to miss some of those things.
Yeah, I mean, in that slow dance I talked about before, you can go to some of their events, sometimes talking to some of the staff, some of the board members, tell me a little bit more about this, and what do you think about that? Could be helpful. Don't discount the public search. Sometimes, they will be, some of the periodicals, if they've done some things in terms of hire family members or, had a sub as a contractor that they own that sort of company. And so you will learn more things about that. And there are a lot of nonprofits doing it well. It's those bad actors that really make the sector just terrible. You get 6 headlines and the many thousand nonprofits. It's like, what are folks doing? And there's some education we do too. Sometimes you just read nonprofits should only have $10 for administrative fees. No, that's the literature back in the day, right? That I want every dollar to go to direct service. So you're saying
We
no.
don't believe that.
Right.
The records show, there's some data to show that well-functioning nonprofits have to allocate 30% to overhead.
So it's learning that kind of stuff too, that, is this a bad thing? What's good and what's bad? And, you ask some people 10 years ago, every dollar has to go to direct services. We have to, these other costs are real costs. So it's also trying to know what does a really good, well-run nonprofit look like.
I also would suggest if you're going to go on the development committee committee, I would say I want to attend a meeting. I think that if they're interested in you, attending a meeting gives you a lot of insight. You can see how people operate, how they're communicating, what the agenda's like, how organized they are. It gives you a pitch. It gives you another little piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. And if you can talk to this, it's always a dance, not always, no universal truth here. Many times, the dance between the executive director and the board, particularly the board chair, is just that. While you have, roles and responsibilities, it is how does this board chair work with the board, and how do they work with the EDC, the executive director? It's truly the only staff member that the board really manages is the executive director. Sometimes it doesn't look that way in an organization. Mm-hmm. It becomes why is it that way? What's going on? And ask the curious questions. And we balance too. How do we create a transparent environment as an executive director? How do we create space where you can ask the questions without being annoyed by the question? Right? You know, trust but verify. So how do we produce the right documents that aren't overwhelming? So you can get a sense of, are we managing our resources in a consistent manner with the regulatory environment? And be able to provide you the sort of the data that makes sense, not to overwhelm you. Not everyone's going to come out of finance from a finance background and read all of these spreadsheets. So how do we stand up those KPIs and documents that make sense to you and create spaces so you can ask questions without being offended? You don't trust me, what's going on? Why are you suspicious?
Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Douglas Dubois. I'm a multi-industrial professional first. I truly apologize, I missed the first hour, but I came with a question that was in my mind. How involved is the board in the vision for the organization, especially in regards to mitigating the risk and anticipating challenges? If you look at our current government right now, for instance, how ready was Columbia University in terms of planning and anticipating the challenges that would have come, ahead of the institutions? How involved is the board in planning for issues like that?
Sure. Well, nobody could have anticipated what's happened in the last 6 months. Yeah.
Some knew it was gonna happen.
I think so.
Yeah.
So I would say that the board is very involved in the vision of the organization. Because you want the organization to, strategy is important. And sometimes the staff is very much focused on the day-to-day. And so the board should really be involved in strategy. I think over the last, we were talking about this, between 9/11 and then whatever time, it's a great time to be a board member because you really need it. It requires outside of the box thinking. It requires all of your experience from every. I think if you're on a board and you're not discussing some of what's happening and where we're going and how is it impacting us, then you're not doing your job.
Agreed. And if you don't have the skill set to do like a financial risk assessment, then to bring in
You need to
consultant and
Yeah.
staff who can do that.
Yeah.
Especially now.
So yeah.
Yeah, I would say our board was probably ahead of B in terms of looking at enterprise risk management a few years ago. And when we do some risk exercises, we recognize that our board was really focused on, in terms of the domains of risk, reputational risk and financial risk. And we had a sort of a different lens on the staff side. And so through a facilitated process, we were able to sort of round out how do we create an enterprise risk management strategy, how do we look at some risk mitigation opportunities. And in this environment, it's difficult to call with so many changes every day. We've been in many exercises trying to understand our values and our principles, and we were talking about that offline. And how do you still render services? And it's not always easy, right? Some of our work, we draw down monies from HUD. We actually support our survivors in housing with rent vouchers. However, if HUD says you might not be able to work with a certain population, you have a balance. We still need to be able to do that, but do we travel over our values of not working with certain populations because of what's happening in the world? So we are going to invite our board into that conversation even more so because it is a challenging time. How do you continue to do this work? How do you support your values, your principles, and continue to function?
Thank you very much to our panelists.